Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for the second part of the ValueShore conference this morning. I'd like to welcome Ewan from Forrester. Ewan Davis is the senior analyst based here in London, and he's going to talk us through some of the research that he's provided. So without further ado, Ewan Davis, thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It feels like 12 o'clock, but it's actually 9:30, coming from Cambridge at 6:15 this morning. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Ewan Davis. I'm a principal analyst at Forrester, and I work within the sourcing and vendor management team. So my work is to really help customers, clients, banks, pharmaceutical companies, retailers, companies really, public sector, to figure out what their sourcing strategies should actually be. One of the reasons I was asked here this morning was to give you my knowledge, really, or the fruits of my research into some of the work we've been doing in Europe around nearshoring, and in particular Spain. I've actually spent some time in Spain. I lived and worked there for 6 months. I helped a company over there set up their IT services practice, and I got to know some of the Spanish companies who were there. I got to know some of the Spanish outsourcing companies that were there, and I got to really know some of the Spanish people. And I have to say, I came back with a little girl who we called Rosa, who was a little bit of Spain, which we now have in the UK. And when it rains, it's really nice to think, well, there's a little bit of Spain I have in Cambridge. So one of the reasons why I was asked here is to give you my impression, really, on how companies like yourselves can really source some of those skills from Spain. I think the concept of offshoring is well understood, especially in America, especially in the UK. But once you move out of the UK, then it's not quite so clear-cut. And in many ways, I think when you actually think about offshoring from continental Europe, there's all sorts of cultural issues, data protection issues, language translation issues, documentation issues, which really do affect whether nearshore, offshore, rightshore, valueshore, which model you should go for. So what I wanted to do is to really give you an overview, really, into some of the trends which I'm seeing among your customers, among your peers. And the first one, without doubt, is a focus on cost. The recession really is dominating the decision-making. The recession is really reconfiguring how companies put together their sourcing strategies. What I'm actually seeing is firms asking for a 10% discount across their rate cards, across their service providers. And the way the service providers are affording it is by cutting back 18%. So some of the things they're doing around service automation, some of the places they're putting their own services, means they can pass to you, the customer, a 10% reduction in rates. Vendor management is becoming increasingly important. So where you actually, the way in which you manage your vendors, some firms are actually consolidating the vendors, and others are even using new technologies such as e-sourcing in order to drive down the cost of their IT services rates. So those new spending priorities really are having an effect. And I also think there's new ways of contracting emerging. New contracts around managed outcomes rather than time and materials. But these really do require a level of sourcing maturity that not all of us actually have. And the way I actually look at sourcing maturity is to look at those businesses, those firms which really were first in writing these contracts, and a lot of them were manufacturing firms, and then finance firms, and then retailers, and then you start understanding how that sourcing maturity is going to play out. And the final one is, I think clients are always looking for ways to minimize risk, and there really is a risk from some of these global delivery models. Satyam needs no further explanation to understand exactly what those risks should actually be. And the way I see things, I think Europeans really need to, and even I call the UK Europe, we are a European country in the UK, though sometimes you wouldn't think it, but I think UK companies really do need to think some of these issues through when they go to an offshore model. And those issues centre on their own internal maturity to offshore, Those issues center on how they actually construct the business analyst function so they can offshore, and some of those issues around time zones, visas, and so on and so forth. Those are the sort of issues which I want to explore in this presentation, really. And what I want to do is really give you some insights into the way firms are engaging globalized IT services, and then talk some of those nearshore and offshore issues, and then give you my ideas or my insights why I think Spain is a credible offshore destination. So let's kick off. Global delivery. Really, global delivery in my mind is about the globalization of the IT services industry. 10 years ago, we really didn't think about India as providing offshore services. We really didn't think about Poland as a BPO delivery center. We didn't think of Spain as a center of innovation. But these things have matured over time. And we've put together this simple definition, really, which tries to basically define what global delivery is for customers. Really, what you're seeing is vendors or customers putting together these models. Now, if you asked me 5 years ago, I would say most companies wanted to have their own captive centers, and they wanted to own their global delivery model. So they'd build a captive center in India, they'd build a captive center in China, and they'd try to figure out a way of putting together the processes to underpin that particular model. Now, fast forward 5 years, and there's roughly about 160 captives up for sale in India right now. And the problem is, companies just cannot make them pay. So when you put together, when you actually do a captive, you tend to make it, the same as what you have. So you tend to have the same carpets, the same signage, the same, pot plants in the reception. You want it to look the same. Now the problem is, when you do that, you don't actually run it efficiently. And a lot of captives don't actually run to profit and loss either. So they tend to be ran from the head office, and when they're run from the head office, you tend to have things and costs and businesses slide. So what I'm seeing more and more is companies starting to look at their vendors to put together those global delivery models. And what they actually want is low-cost locations. They want IT services from low-cost locations. They want robust processes so they can ensure consistent delivery. And they want to be able to see some of the innovations. They want to be able to see their vendor capture some of the innovations on behalf of their clients. Now, it's no surprise to me that a lot of the major IT services vendors have moved to Spain to try and tap into some of the core banking expertise. And I think Daniel made a very good point there when he showed you 4 out of the top 5 banks, their cost efficiency per process. That is one of the reasons why more and more vendors that I track have started to shift development down into Spain to try and capture some of those benefits. And that really is what global delivery is about. It's about the right skills at the right price at the right location. But mostly, it's about application work. And you can see here from this graphic, we took this from a 2008 survey. We tried to figure out, well, what are you actually using offshore resources for? And there's no surprise there. It's dominated by application work. So custom application development, testing, maintenance, help desk, those are the bread and butter business of offshore service provision. Now, the interesting thing for me is when you actually look at what the number one resource is, it's onshore contractors. And that to me is a very time materials way of putting together remote IT delivery. It's not really focusing on the skills and processes that the vendor can bring, it's focusing on bodies and what the vendor and how cheap the vendor can actually supply resources into your organization.